Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibition and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As we begin all of our programs, we like to ground ourselves in the spaces we are occupying. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. MoAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And we encourage everyone to learn more about the native lands you occupy by visiting native-land.ca, and I'll put that in the chat. I welcome you today to our monthly program series, African Diaspora Film Club, co-sponsored by Black Public Media and presented with Cornelius Moore, who is the co-director of California Newsreel, the 54-year-old social issue nonprofit film distribution and production company. He is also an independent film curator, specializing in works from and about the Black world. Modeled after a book club, we expect that you will have already viewed the film when you join us for this discussion. But if you haven't seen the film, please stick around. We just can't guarantee there won't be any spoilers. Today, we're excited to discuss the documentary Restitution, Africa's Fight for Its Art with director Nora Philippe. She is a film director, curator, producer, and educator, a former fellow of Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination and graduate in art history at École Normale Supérieure. She has extensively worked on European colonial history and African-American arts and material culture. She has curated the Black Dolls exhibition at Maison Rouge, Paris in 2018 and directed Like Dolls, All Rise before Restitution in 2021. Before signing Restitution, it aired in more than 20 countries. Since 2022, she heads the Documentary Cinema Network and Lab Eurodoc. We'll start the discussion moderated by Cornelius, and we encourage everyone to participate by making comments and submitting questions through the chat or the Q&A box. And finally, please take a moment to type where you're joining us from in the chat. And if you're comfortable, just join us where you are in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Cornelius and Nora. Take it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The introduction, and hello, Nora. Thank you for joining us and for making your film.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome, and I look forward to a very energetic and informative discussion. So, for people seeing the film, they know what the subject is, but I'm going to begin with extending beyond what you're an art historian, but what encouraged you, inspired you to make this documentary?
Yes, I was actually trained in art history. I graduated in art history in France. I also had a scholarship to study at NYU in visual studies, cultural studies, and I was trained as a museum curator. So I went to École du Louvre, which is a very traditional, the traditional French way to become a museum curator. And what is striking, so I was supposed to become a museum curator, and what is striking when you go that path, at least 20 years ago or 10 years ago in France, you would not hear anything about the colonial history of our European museums. And you did not know that actually museums, our universal European museums were actually, born within and from the colonial era. And when I found out about this story, I was very shocked that it was not part of the curriculum, and that I had only heard about, the very shiny, lightful, dimension of the story of the foundation of our museums. and not the real story of also the way and the circumstances in which many items, that is to say millions of items, came to our European collections, especially from Africa. So I had met with Bénédicte Savoy before she co-wrote the report with Fermín Sarr. And when the report was published in 2018, it's also been published in English. So you can it's available actually for free on the web as an English translated PDF. You know, that it was commissioned by the French government, and so I had attended her, you know, her keynote speech when she joined the Collège de France, and I knew her work, but when I was, you know, I had lots of admiration for her academic work, but when the report was published, it was a bomb. I mean, we all knew that it would really there would be, you know, a before and an after, and indeed it's what happened. So I started writing the script of this film just when the report was published, and so that's the beginning. But there's another, if I may, there's another beginning to this story in my intellectual, let's say, or political journey. It was by, you know, the fact that I lived in New York, I studied in the States, and I worked on the African American history through the history of Black dolls, and especially handmade Black dolls, you know, appearing in the 19th century. And so I made an exhibition about a collection of African American dolls, and I published on this topic. And to me, that was my training in, you know, African American story, Black diaspora history, and also anti-racism. So this is the, you know, the background, my background when I tackled the topic of restitutions.
So back to the report, because I have not read the report. Is the report specifically about French involvement, or is it also extended to the European continent and references to the US as well?
Yes, so the report is an incredible book because it mixes theory, philosophy, history, and also very, you know, practical guidelines about what to return, when, why, and how, and to whom. So it's not only about France. It definitely focuses on, you know, on French collections, or French African collections, of African artifacts, because they are huge, and because there's an emergency, because also, you know, claims had been sent officially to France, and they had been rejected. So there was really an urgency to, you know, to just face our history and to respond with dignity to the claims that were being sent from certain African countries. But it also talks about, you know, the history of you know, colonial collections in Belgium, in the UK, in the Netherlands. So it states that it's a European story, and Europe so far has not been very active. I mean, it's countries, you know, individually in Europe that are, you know, trying to take steps, but Europe as a whole, while colonialism has been European, is not an active, you know, Europe does not act as Europe on the front of institutions.
That's very interesting, given that there is a European community and legislature and all those things, and it's not been discussed there, but it's being done in individual country, which also makes it more difficult to organize around. So that's something to note.
Absolutely. And the maps, all the data that the report published, which was again collected this way, showed new figures, and it was just flabbergasting to understand that millions of items were in the Western world, and that so it was not just a question of quantity, it was a question of proportions in comparison to what had stayed. So it's very difficult to be accurate with these figures, but we are talking about classical African art. And we are talking about the hypothesis that about the 3/4 of African classical art are outside of the continent, which is very specific to, African heritage.
We talked a little bit about before we all came on about another film, and one that you excerpt from, called "You Hide Me" by Ni Kwate Owu, from Ghana, Ghanaian filmmaker, and that was my introduction to the subject in the 1970s, because that film has him going to the British Museum of Art, is it correct, and finding these African art pieces that were basically looted and concealed in the British Museum. So yeah, and it's not widely available right now. I mean, although it was kind of more attention was paid to it last year. I think it appeared at some film festivals and did a round of screenings. Largely, I think with the work of June Giovanni, who has her own film archive. So I just wanted to lift up that.
Absolutely. Also, the elegance of the reports by Felwine Sarr and Bénédicte Savoie was that they made new research about also. I mean, they wanted to rewrite a history of the claims, a history of representation of restitution, of visual representation, filmic, literary, and a history of the claims, because it's so easy to say, oh, but this is, a trend, or we should not hurry. This is like a sort of like, yeah, this is like a new fashion, but no, because there's, but no, I mean, France has been very vocal. I mean, conservative voices have tried to make people believe that those claims from African nations were very, very new and very, very few. And so the report, writes the story of no. It's been decades that these claims have been published or, sent diplomatically to Europe, and they were not listened to. So this is actually Bénédicte's last book, Africa's Struggle for Its Art. So it's published in English and it's available in the States. And so she really, elaborates on this hidden or silenced history. And so this film by Nikwate Owo, that was so he was at film school in London when he made it. And it's groundbreaking. And I wanted to also to pay tribute to this film, of course, in my film by quoting it. So it's incredibly radical. It's incredibly sharp, and it says everything that should be said. It was made in 1971.
1971.
Yeah, by a film school student, and he said it all. And what's interesting, so he's explained also that he wanted to join like very different like black societies and fights basically in the US, in the UK. So he joined in the group of the film Caribbean, Black Caribbean activists, people from West Africa, so that to state that it should be a grand common black agenda, restitutions. And so this film is, yeah, you can still program it, and it's important to show that, yeah, I mean, it was already there. It was there, 71.
So in your film, you I think very importantly give the viewer the historical background of what colonialism mean, it's people know the word colonialism, but what actually happened. We know about the forced labor of people and the extraction of resources, but your film also talks about the resources of art and culture, which have been taken, and even the contemporary arguments that, well, what would be going on with science, quote unquote, scientific research, and that's what the extraction of the art was about, and also the arguments that the museums are preserving the art, and in a way that that they're even saying that people on the continent would not have done. So you can elaborate on that if you like.
Yes, so we are dealing with this particularly perverted and toxic colonial behavior that is at the same time about killing people and killing cultures, killing religions, killing communities, killing languages, destroying them. And at the same time, there's a will to preserve them as trophies. So and it's very, all of this, what you were listing, it's connected. So you have people who in the same in the same day or in the same week and for the same institutions who will kill people in colonized countries because they are either they are part of the military, for instance, but they also work with scientists or for scientists, and they work with missionaries, or they work with museum administrators, and so they will they will organize to send to European museums cultural artifacts, religious artifacts, but also human remains. So, there's this, and this is so shocking that it's not been so much addressed. So when we're talking about colonial collections, we are talking about collections that combine at the same time art, culture, what we call now cultural artifacts, but also human remains, or what we should call ancestors' remains. So this is what happened massively in Africa while it was colonized, and it's a history that we actually know. I mean, there have been like thousands of publications on what the colonial armies and administrations did in Africa. And the thing is, this myth. This mythology of the intrinsic virtue of the museum had resisted the publication. I mean, this history. So it's very disturbing.
But do these arguments persist today in reaction to the demand that the art and artifacts be returned?
So yeah, the context luckily has changed thanks to the very hard work of activists and artists and communities and of course scholars. But so when the report was published in 2018, there was a very, very heavy and toxic backlash. And many conservative voices were just, really widely saying in the press, all over the press, in mainstream press, that, African museums were not ready, that there were no African institutions that could, host the returned heritage, that European museums, know better, and they know how to preserve works, and African people, and there are no African museum professionals, etc. So very, with a very, of course, racist background to that kind of argument. These arguments have slowly, not disappeared, but are less strong than before. because so many voices have pushed for restitutions that it's progressively become hard. I mean, it's not possible anymore to say that kind of thing on a very mainstream television or platform. But and also museum creators have been very bravely pushing for restitutions and also making them happen. So my point is, restitutions have taken place. They happen. We are now in the realm of that concrete action. So all European governments, at least the ones that are concerned with massive national colonial collections, know they have to address the problem, know that they have to organize quickly restitutions. But the thing is, depending on the legislation of each European country, it takes different paths. So for instance, in France, so just to make it to explain in a nutshell, so when a thing, whatever thing it is, it's since 2002, it's even like it concerns also human remains, believe it or not. But so anything that is in our national public collections cannot leave that status, cannot leave the national collections without like a whole set of new laws. And so they are considered inalienable, so they cannot be alienated, which means that taking them out of the status and returning them would mean, in the current state of French law, it means alienating them, which is actually, it's the reverse, of course. It's the exact opposite. So a law has been voted, a very first law in October 2020. My film was first broadcast in 2022, when the restitution spinning actually happened. So in 2020, two years ago, a first law was voted. It was very difficult, but it was voted unanimously at the National Assembly, and for the return of 26 objects to Benin and 1 to Senegal.
But how was that? How were those pieces decided upon? Who made that decision?
So one of the qualities of the Sarre-Savoie report was that it published a list of artifacts and actually iconic artifacts that needed to be returned urgently to about 8 countries in Africa. And so those artifacts were part of the list, but it was not, this list was not so limited. So that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer, it's again, I mean, for what happened in 2020 for this law is very long to tell, but let's say that Benin was not happy at all with the way that these artifacts were selected. They were asking for more and for also other, artifacts that was really important for the country, and they did not return. They were not happy with the process, the way, the selection was made. And Senegal, so many other items, and especially archive and manuscripts and jewels were, expected, and it's only the sabre that came back.
No. Yeah, and even about that, I want to refer, in your film, there was in the narration, I'm going to read from it. It raising some fascinating questions about where the narrator says, in independent states, returns aren't yet organized without diplomatic costs. These returns serve huge financial, industrial, and military interests. For the return of just one saber, which you referred to from El Haj Omar Tal, France got hundreds of millions of euros in arms sales and the externalization of measures against sub-Saharan immigration. Could you please elaborate on what that concretely means?
Yes. So So what happened in Senegal when the Saber came back? So again, it's a long story because the family had claimed, had advocated for the return of the Saber since the 90s. So they had, told the French government in the 90s that it was really, necessary to return the Saber. And so the Saber was taken within a particularly violent and bloody French colonial military enterprise in Mali, in Mali, Guinea, Senegal, in that region. And so the man Archinard, the military who took all those artifacts and manuscripts and weapons was really a colonial, what we call a colonial butcher, really. So so the collections in our museums are still called Archinard, les fonds Archinard. So they still bear his name. And so it's a particularly important matter. So what when there's any diplomatic exchange between countries, you sign contracts, as things happen, and any operation between governments take several dimensions. So that's what I was actually told, and it was not considered shocking at all by the people who work at the foreign affairs in France, and so I met them in Dakar when the Saber was instituted, and it was a very big ceremony with authorities from Senegal and from France. And so indeed the Ministry of the Army and many ministries were actually represented from France for that event. And so lots of contracts were signed. It was also about, cultural institutions or, partnerships, the building of new museums and, film school, the selling of trains, and for the transportation industry, and also weapons. France is, I believe, the second or the third, provider for weapons in the world. I think the US are actually an important player in that.
Oh, probably the first. I think we can agree about that. Yeah. This was the opportunity to sign very, very important industrial contracts. The professional press of, the people, the industries which build and sell weapons in France, just published the information and celebrated the fact that indeed the same day as the restitution of the Saber in Dakar were signed very important contracts. And this contract, so it's particularly ironic and terrible. These contracts not only but do deal with the building and the delivery of heavily armed. I don't have all the vocabulary for military questions, but like heavily equipped, let's say, boats that will enable Senegal to patrol their own territorial waters, so that there is no illegal immigration. So this opens a vortex of geopolitical questions and continued injustice in the relationships between Europe and Africa. So one of the obsessions of France today is indeed blocking or limiting immigration from Africa. And so it's very, very disturbing to see, to observe that on the occasion of this restitution of the Saber, contracts were signed that actually deal with let's say contracts that are anti-immigration, Which means that the security forces on the continent or various countries agree to police immigration of people from the continent to Europe.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's the other shocking part. And as you know, a European and French citizen, I cannot comment on Senegalese, domestic, politics and policies. So I would not, I cannot talk about that because I'm not a specialist. But of course, it's between two sovereign governments that these contracts were signed. So, but I know that the Senegalese civic society was made aware of that. And I'm certain that there was some opposition, or at least I believe. But this is, another dimension. And I don't live in Senegal. I'm not active, politically active or culturally active in Senegal. So it's not, somewhere where I would go. But it's a very painful reality. That's absolutely certain.
But well, it would seem to me that the whole issue of dynamics of power shifted when African states gained their independence from European colonial powers, and that's in the 60s and 70s. And also, I recall probably one of the last countries that ended colonialism in the continent was South Africa, and Thabo Mbeki had his initiative of African Renaissance. So the campaign like that could actually wield some power, because South Africa had economic and political power in the world. So I'm curious what role an entity like the African Union has played in this whole debate, in this whole campaign.
Yeah. So yes, when the African nations became independent, there were not lots of, but claims to organize the return of their heritage. But not all nations were busy on that, on that topic in the first years. What's striking, and what I would like to share with you, and that's part of an answer, to your question about, actually your question is dealing with Pan-Africanism, and the question of, African, union and potential unity. So what's striking is when I research, the archive and tried also to build a narrative. It's very frustrating to make films, because you have to be very pithy and very it has to be quick. It's not like writing a book. And so what's striking is that as soon as Africa organizes Pan-African venues and festivals, the question of the cultural heritage and the shared Pan-African, cultural heritage is really important. First thing. And second thing, the question of return and the ambition to have like shared claims for return appear, and are featured in all manifestos. So this is the case in 1966 in Dakar. This is the case in Algiers in 1969.
You're referring to conferences that happened there, cultural conferences, right? Okay.
Yeah, the Pan-African, festival. So all of these moments are historically moments when, claims for restitutions are uttered and shared and published. But the thing is, Europe was so, was blocking the way and would reject automatically those requests. So it's tiring when you keep asking, advocating and asking for something, and that you're treated only with despise and with no action. Of course, at a certain point you just you're tired. But so the sources that I can have regarding this history, this Pan-African attempts to deal with restitutions, come from one of the speakers in my film. Was an incredibly important and inspiring man, great, wonderful, an important gentleman in the history of contemporary Africa. It's so I'm talking about Olabi Yai, who's from Benin and who worked for a very long time at UNESCO to advocate for the importance and the protection of immaterial heritage, not material but immaterial heritage. And he taught in Florida. He lived in Cuba, in Brazil. I mean, he was a man of the the Black Atlantic, and he told me that it was identified as a really important stake and challenge to have a Pan-African, claim for restitution. That there were some attempts, of course, but that it was still difficult to find, a common language. And also, he told me that the different the different steps in the history of independences and decolonization, and in Portuguese-speaking countries, English-speaking countries. I mean, all of this made it difficult to have a shared policy, but it's still being discussed, of course. And if you might, I don't know if it's published it's translated into English, but there's a scholar called independent scholar called Amzad Bukhari, who's written critically decisive books about Pan-Africanism, and he also tackles the question of restitution as a shared horizon and agenda for the African Union. But it's still something that politicians and governments work on. And that it's difficult. Well, you see, I mean, Europe, of course, it has to to do with guilt and reparation, but Europe has not succeeded at all. I mean, it has not officially tried, to have a common European response to the emergency of restitution and reparation. So,
could you put those names in the chat? Those two names you mentioned, that would be good, because I wouldn't know the spelling of them. It seemed to be important, and even if their work has not been translated into English, there'll be people here who would, in the audience, who could still access the work.
I'm also adding in the chat the reference to the digital Benin dialogue group, which is a very, very how could I say? I mean, groundbreaking, and it should be an example of what can be done in terms of international cooperation between different museums in Europe and museums in Africa, well, specifically in Nigeria. And so I'm sending you an article here, and then I'm sending you the here you go. So Amzad Bukhari Yabara has written about Pan-Africanism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it also seems to me that, well, after George Floyd was murdered in the United States in 2020, there was certainly a massive response in the US against white supremacy and colonialism, and it resonated with the entire world. I mean, there was a lot of activities, a lot of activism that went on in Europe and in the Caribbean and in South America. And so what role do you think, or have you been able to see that that kind of activism has had an impact on this whole campaign and the reaction, and putting the pressure on European governmental and cultural agencies?
Yeah, of course. So, it was very interesting to see the reactions, the official reactions of European museums to, Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd murder. In France, some official reactions were, a museum shouldn't deal with that. We have nothing to do with that. The role of a museum is to deal with art. So it's been very shocking. But you have also, European museums who would say, Black Lives Matter and, official statements, but then would do nothing when it came to restitutions and to decolonizing their practices and their, the way they present their collections. So it's also, that sort of disturbing use of, statements. But when you're a museum, a statement in support of Black Lives Matter I mean, should, you know, should in terms of action, should mean that you decolonize your displays, that you decolonize your cultural and educational operations, etc., etc. So I wanted to share with you another. No, I was checking the date of when Black Panther 1 was released in the States, because you remember one of the like opening scenes is in a museum, and it stages.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is, you know, it's been in the history of the representation of restitution claims and actions. This is major. This is a really an important moment. So yeah, I mean, of course, I do believe that the work of Black Lives Matter and affiliated campaigns and movements have been very efficient in changing the game for museums, and you know, yeah, they've changed the conversation, of course, and we have to pay tribute to them forever for that. But we see also every day that I mean, it's an everyday struggle, and that when it comes to museums, the force and the strength of conservatism, you know, like, you know, just keeping the status quo and not disturbing too much collections, and just, you know, uses and displays. There's a lot of resistance going on.
Well, it would also seem to me that any kind of talk about sending back the artifacts and the arts to the continent and to institutions there that support for the infrastructure of those institutions is part of the restitution. And so I'm curious if what kind of discussions there have been about that, what kind of demands have come from those institutions. The one I know some museums in South Africa, but the one I'm not as familiar with, I haven't visited yet, is the one in Senegal. What's the name of it? The
Musée des Civilisations Noires.
Yeah,
In Dakar.
Yeah. So in just talking about organization, these institutions on the continent are there unified demands? That's what, and back to the whole issue of Pan-Africanism, that would say, well, yes, we want the material back on our terms, but we also, you know, part of the colonialism, the extraction of colonialism was taking resources away, and we want those resources back in our, you know, to support our cultural institutions.
Yes, yes. So this is the, you know, the wider dimension of the topic, and it should definitely be addressed indeed. So thank you for your remark. So yeah, in France we talk about restitution and reparation. Reparation is a word that, I mean, is a notion that is being especially used in the Caribbean regarding the reparation of slavery. Well, so the way that restitutions are framed politically and by institutions right now in France do not include reparation at all. It does in other countries, especially in Belgium and the Netherlands right now, and in Germany too. Germany, 1 year after the publication of the report, has, you know, signed an agreement to return more than 1,000 of Benin bronzes to Nigeria, while, you know, it did not colonize Nigeria. France has Benin bronzes, and the government has not. I mean, France has not budged. So the question of it's a conversation that I had with the director that you can see in my film. She's one of the speakers, Sylvie Memel-Cassis. She's the director of the Musée des Civilisations in Abidjan, in the Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. And she was telling me, you know, just in terms of, well, even if we just stay in the, you know, perimeter in the realm of the museum, restitutions should also come with reparation. That is to say, you know, the money that was made out of, you know, licensing rights of the artifacts, you know, postcards, products, whatever, you know. And also, if we all agree, for instance, if we all agree on, you know, that artifact that belongs to us but remains over there, then it should be considered on loan or like some kind of, you know, rented, and then the money, you know, the revenue, the income should come back to us. So there are two major publications that state that restitutions could actually not be complete and would not, you know, be fully efficient if they are not organized within a mindset and a set of policies that deal with reparation, and so like a more global, you know, reparation set. So it's the UN, actually, the UN published a report a year ago that stated that restitutions should be part of like more, you know, general reparation gestures. And Achille Mbembe, who was commissioned by the French government a year ago, a huge report about how to redefine and reorganize and redesign relationships between, you know, France and the African continent, which is, again, it's a strange way to frame it because, you know, France and we are talking about 54 countries in Africa, but well. And the report stated that, restitution should never be a diplomatic currency and, you know, a diplomatic tool in any kind of exchange, and that it should have only an ethical consideration and imperative, I would say, even. And that, restitution is just one tool or one aspect of reparation, and that we're still waiting for you know, policies that really address reparation. So the conversation is there. It's just a lack of political will right now in Europe and especially in France. And you know, there is no, you know, general approach to reparations in Africa. Not at all. No, not at all.
Well, France is still, it's not about this program in art, but still with Haiti, that's still, which is even longer, you know, a reparations to Haiti, or is something that France has completely dismissed. So
yes,
the idea that, you know, the arguments that they, you know, were put forward that, you know, they would not want to do that with Africa is sort of consistent with their response.
Yes, the New York Times edited a wonderful, you know, long form article about Haiti, about the questions of like the banks, you know, the French, British banks that made awful loads of money out of the, So the story of Haiti is not told in French schools, not at all. We only learn about the glory of Napoleon, and not that, you know, he reestablished or tried to reestablish slavery, and that he just punished Haiti for centuries. I mean, with consequences that took centuries to repair. So yes, there's a lot of work to do. Yes.
So thanks, Elizabeth, for posting in the chat about the event that happened a few days ago on Thursday, which included a panel with Nguri Blankenberg, who's the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art, and in which she talked about the why she had removed the Benin bronzes from being displayed at the museum. And now, quote from her from somewhere else, she says, "The point is that we have stuff we are displaying that we shouldn't have for various ethical reasons. We need to right the wrongs of the past." Your film is mainly about, well, Europe, but what did you find out about the US museums and when you were doing your research for the film?
Yeah. In this talk you were quoting her. She says, I just don't, my intention is not to be the director of a museum of looted goods. And,
Yes.
and yeah. And you had, like, I interviewed museum directors in Europe who had exactly the same statement, but also I'm not the director of a cemetery. I'm not, so those human remains, I mean, this is horrible, and we should deal with that, or we should talk about that, and we should really have a public conversation about that. So yeah, that's the case with Nanette Sloop in Köln, in Cologne, for instance, and in Germany as well. There's a lot to do. Anyway, so the United States, well, you had those very, wealthy collectors who would, go to Paris, Brussels, or Hamburg, or London, of course, and would have the means to start a collection of African art, and then to bring it to New York or Boston, or elsewhere, or Los Angeles in the States. So it's another part of the story. There's an incredible, really good book by Yael Biro, who used to work at the Met, who wrote an incredible, incredibly exhaustive book about how the market, basically, how the art market in Europe fed, and made it possible for American collectors, who were all about, abstract art and, African arts that, renewed the art in Europe that needed so much, revolution, and African art was supposed to feed that visual revolution. So yeah, lots through the market, actually, but it's the same thing, with Germany. So you have to, even like Switzerland or Germany have very, very, very rich colonial collections, and they were not. I mean, Switzerland was not a colonizer, and Germany had very little colonies in Africa. So the market is key, is absolutely key in, the spreading of African art in the West. So, of course, the United States, given that they had major collectors, immense wealth, and great museums as well, that intended to be as universal as, their European competitors, of course that they had their African art departments. So there are so many Benin bronzes, at the Metropolitan, at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and Harvard. I mean, so many university collections have, Benin bronzes as well, and the Getty. And so I'm really happy to see that the Smithsonian is, paving the way now. But so many other, private and public collections, museums in the US have problematic, African art that was looted during the colonial era. So yeah, I mean, it's not because you have an invoice from an important gallery in Brussels or in Paris, and that you bought it in the 60s, that it makes you, the rightful owner of an artifact. So this conversation is absolutely super important in the States, and also because, again, there's something that maybe, outside of the museum business or world, it's not something that you can easily understand. But I mean,
well, I thought it was important that you, in your film, you had gave people an idea that art as a market, an investment for wealthy people, that I don't think people understand. It's like, okay, art, you show it, you have, and that's it. But it's like it has, monetary value, and that's incredibly. I mean, maybe it is complicated, but the tax write-offs people get, the whatever they do with their money, and I mean, they can feel good about it, but it's also they can line their pockets too.
Yeah, I could tell a very short story. A man who inherited from two Benin bronzes, I believe it was in Scotland or in the UK, realized actually what he had on, in his living room, and that it was worth millions of pounds. And he also realized what the story was behind, because his great grandfather, was a soldier in the colonial, military in Nigeria. And so, he decided just to go to Nigeria and hand them back because he thought that it was the right thing to do. And it was the whole celebration, and he actually refused that, it shouldn't be, it's normal. Like he said, he wanted it to keep low key because it was just a normal gesture. So I believe that when you're a private collector, frankly, this is a great opportunity to do something that is right, and that you have if you have a collection and you have money, then you can also fund a museum and help restitution. Also, there are more and more museums now that offer some support for private collectors who want to restitute, who want to return, but would not know how to do so. And so, for instance, in the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford does that, and they've helped collectors. So there are plenty of ways to return also when you're a collector, when you're a private collector.
Well, thank you for sharing that information. We're almost approaching the end of our conversation, and the clock is ticking. But I wanted to hear from you about where the film has been seen, shown publicly and broadcast, and what have been some of the conversations that have resulted from after the film has been presented.
Yes. So, well, I was very, very glad that the film could be seen in the States and through Black public media. It was really great. So it was co-produced by Arte, which is the cultural French-German TV channel. It's an important one in Europe because they also broadcast elsewhere in Europe in many different languages. So it was broadcast through Arte, then TV5, which means the French-speaking worldwide, which makes many, many, many countries. And it was also bought by Al Jazeera, which made it available in the Arab world and in actually many other countries, and also in New Zealand, in Switzerland as well, in Sweden, etc., in Spain, etc., etc. So it was broadcast very widely, and it shows that the topic is it's a public conversation that is going on, and people need to educate themselves, and I believe that's what the film try to do. That's what I tried to do with the film, and the film was very successful and broadcast widely, so it shows that there was an appeal. So I could tell you just to to wrap up, but I was lucky enough to go to certain like high schools, for instance, with the film for screenings. And I mean, the reaction of people who are like 16, 18 was beautiful. It was like, okay, like, what do we do now? Like, we need to act now. This should not even be, a question or a debate or a conversation. We should return now, and we should listen to, what's needed and what's being asked for by African nations and communities now, and do the right thing to do. So it gives courage when you hear, the next generation having very clear ideas. We need clear ideas, and we need to act now.
The fact that it was via TV5, did that mean it got to the African continent in the Francophone Africa?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay.
And same thing for Al Jazeera. So and we had screenings in Benin as well, so in universities. So the film has circulated, and I hope that it will circulate more on the African continent. It takes the organization of screenings, etc. But I could travel. So speakers from the film can travel and organize screenings. So we are there for that.
Great. So speaking of that, I don't know. Felwine Sarr, right. He will be as part of the Museum of the African Diaspora African Book Club on the 26th of February discussing his book, African Meditations. And also for other Bay Area people, there is at the University Art Museum on the 23rd, he will be performing. So, and he plays a very significant part in your film.
He does. He's a man to follow and to read. Absolutely. So yes.
Again, thank you very much, Nora. It's been a delight talking to you and the importance of your film. I'm really appreciating it.
Well, thank you very much, Cornelius. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And yeah, congrats for this program that I will now follow from Paris, France. And thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nora and Cornelius, for this very rich conversation, and Nora for this really important film. I know I learned so much from it, and I can't wait to continue to encourage other people to watch it and learn from it as well. Our next African Diaspora Film Club will be discussing the documentary Out of the Muck on Sunday, February 26th from 5 to 6 p.m. And we'll be speaking with co-directors Ira McKinley and Baween Suchak. And I put a link to register for that program in the chat. We also love to hear your feedback on our programming and hear what you would like to see from us in the future. So if you could take the survey that will pop up when you leave this program, I'd really appreciate that as well. And we would love for you to support MoAD by becoming a member or making a donation. And if you are in the Bay Area or planning to travel here, please do come and see us in person. We have a beautiful exhibition called The New Black Vanguard, curated by Antoine Sargent, and it's on view through March 5th, 2023. And you can check our website out, moadsf.org, for all of our upcoming public programs, both virtual and on-site. And as always, huge thanks to Black Public Media for co-sponsoring the African Diaspora Film Club. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening if you're coming all the way from Paris.
Thank you very much. À bientôt. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.